The Gillard government has responded to the turmoil on world financial markets with repeated assurances that Australia's economic fundamentals are strong. But there's increasing evidence that our macroeconomic strength is not filtering down to the micro level of the streets. An annual survey conducted by the Australian Council of Social Service shows a 12% increase in assistance provided by non-government community and welfare agencies. And more disturbingly, those seeking help are being denied services on more than 345,000 occasions during the 2009-2010 financial year. That's a 19% increase on the previous 12 months. Cassandra Goldie is the Chief Executive of ACOSS. Cassandra, welcome to breakfast.
Yes, good morning, Fran.
What's driving this, more and more people turning to the welfare sector for help?
Look, Fran, I think that the reality is that there has been this perception that Australia has weathered the impacts of the global financial crisis well, and we're here again today, as you say, the Prime Minister coming out, wanting to highlight the strong national economic picture. But the stark reality is that I think our findings show that there is a long lag in the impact of the economic downturn that happened sort of around the 2008-2009 period, and there are a lot of individuals and families who are really struggling at the moment.
How do you know it's linked to the downturn? What do the figures show you? Are you seeing an increase, for instance, in more people being unemployed coming to your services, or lesser employed in a sense?
Well, look, there's a couple of parts of the survey I really do want to highlight this morning. One is that we saw in that period a 50% increase in the assistance being provided for basic financial counselling, trying to help people to manage meeting their daily financial pressures. So it's a 50% increase in 1 year. And emergency relief, so that's when, if you can't meet your bills, being able to get some cash to help you out in that crisis, there was a 49% increase in the turning away of people. So basic cost of living pressures and the fact that we had, I think, a significant growth in the long-term unemployment figures during that period. So people were trying to live for extended periods of time on the basic New Start allowance. Now, we've been very critical of the fact that that payment has not been increased for, it's actually now 2 decades, Fran, since we've had a real increase in the New Start allowance for people who are unemployed. It's $34 a day now. It's just not enough for people to live on. And that is one of the key factors that our services have highlighted, as well as, of course, the increasing pressure on housing costs. We know that's a big part of the problem.
If we look at that first element you point out there, the basic inadequacy of social security payments, that's the position of the welfare agencies. In a sense, that's not linked to the GFC, is it? That's linked to the rising cost of living. So that payment is not enough in the first place, but as power bills go up, fruit and vegetable costs go up, it just can't cope.
Well, there's 2 parts to it about why that payment has become you're basically living below the poverty line on that one. One is that it isn't properly indexed in the same way as, for example, the age pension and the disability support pension to properly reflect the increases in cost of living. And the other part of it is some of those other payments. You might remember that in 2009 there was a $32 increase given, for example, to the age pensioners and people on the disability support pension. Now, that increase in payment was denied for the unemployment payment and also the sole parent payment. You'll see there's a picture there for sole parents. And the reality is, I think the idea that, being unemployed is a short-term crisis experience is not the reality for over half of people who are currently unemployed have been employed for over 12 months and a third for over 2 years. So trying to live on $34 a day is just brutal.
Cassandra, is what we're seeing here a crisis in the capacity of our services to meet demand? I'm sure there's a shortfall every year. In fact, I know we've done these interviews in the past when these surveys have come out, and the welfare sector and the different agencies we've spoken to have never been able to meet demand, but there's been a sharp increase in that unmet demand.
Look, I want to go with caution here also. On the one hand, there is absolutely this unmet demand during that period. Part of it, though, is also to see that about half of the people that were trying to access community services during that period were people who were in some form of paid work. So I think we saw during this period the experience of people who, whilst they didn't lose their job, for example, they got brought down to lesser hours. It's often, we know, the way that employers try to manage the economic downturn, and we know that's possibly going to be a continuing trend. So we've got people who are in some form of paid work, but it's simply not enough to meet their daily costs. So we are seeing the importance of having essential community services in place to help to get people through those particular periods of time.
Some of those turned away were, for instance, the figures include 50,000 instances of clients who asked for help with housing but are turned away. What happens to them?
Well, that's a very good question, Fran. I mean, I think we know, I was up in Queensland very recently, we heard a lot of talk there about the number of people who are living in cars, living in tents, regional areas where people are trying to hang on to their jobs but can't afford the increase in the housing costs. So the government, certainly during the Rudd era, and it's been continued in now under the Gillard government, has made a strong commitment, as we know, to reducing homelessness and increasing the supply of affordable, adequate housing. But we can't take the brake off that important piece of work for the country. Everybody knows that housing pressures are intense, and that unless we tackle both, for example, encouraging private investment in low-cost affordable housing, addressing some of the tax arrangements that we think help to inflate costs and not flow on to benefit to people who are in low or middle income earners. That part of the picture is really critical, and we really don't want the government to pull back from the investment that needs to happen on that front.
Cassandra Goldie, thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks a lot.
Cassandra Goldie is Chief Executive of the Australian Council of Social Service.